Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch
Shavuot
Hashem. You too, thanks. Okay, so we're continuing the bit Yosef. He says here, "Ulfi shen miderech hatov lif'ol nezek or lismuach beniske shum adam." Interesting, right? So he says here that it's not the good way to damage somebody or to rejoice over the damage of any person. Ve'af al pi shehu ra, even though he's a bad person. Dugma ledavar. So what's an example of that? It says right in the pasuk, "Vayichat itro al kol hatova." Right, this is the parsha Shabbat we're going to read this week. Bezat Hashem. It says right that Itro rejoiced over all the good things that Hashem did for the Jewish people. Lechach hatam hanifra lanu le'amo Yisrael mikol tzaraim ha'el haMoshiach. So, כלומר, כשהקדוש ברוך הוא נפרע מיצרים לישראל, אין התכלית לנקמה, כי אם להושיע את ישראל. So he says the whole point, right, is to rejoice over the right, salvation of the Jews and not the downfall of the wicked. But since they both come hand in hand, right, together, so then, right, we rejoice. That's the whole thing, right? Since we need one for the other, it comes together as a package deal. Therefore, in a case like that, we do rejoice. So he says, that's why you have to word it this way, to show that we're rejoicing over the salvation of the Jews, and not just the downfall of the wicked, right, per se. Right, by itself, what does it, what does it help you that they fell down, the wicked, right? We would have preferred that they did, tshuva and they repented if that was the right, that would have been the preferred option. We don't want them to perish, but the thing is that since our salvation depends on them perishing, right? So then, right, we do rejoice over that. That's the whole thing, right? And that's exactly what's going on today, right? The same thing in Israel today, right? No difference, right? The same idea. Okay, so right, that's the whole idea that he brings here. Interesting idea. Okay, so he says, right, that כי הנשארים ולדורות הבאים ישמעו ויראו ולא יזידון עוד. Right? So it's another thing is that it says that when people hear, right, about how Hashem avenged, the honor of the Jews or whatever, right, that they saved them from their enemies. So people will fear, God, and not attempt to do something like that in the future. We hope that that's the case, right? Sometimes they do it anyway. They don't give up, right? They don't learn their lesson sometimes. What can you do, right? So it's what it is. But right, so yeah, this is what he says, this rabbi. So he says another thing he brings is that sometimes a king, right, he takes vengeance over the people who are afflicting his friends, his beloved ones. Aval atzorim kvar hargu et ohavav. But he says what happens is that the people who are afflicting, right, they already killed his friends. So he says now there's no more benefit to kill those people because right, the people are already dead. The victims are dead already. But he says Hashem doesn't do that way. So what does that mean? That he takes vengeance from the wicked and saves Israel. It goes on. Katuv be'Orchot Chaim, right? It says in this book Orchot Chaim. Afal gav de'en chotemin b'shtayim. So he says even though we don't close, we don't make the final blessing is only one and not two, right? Not two blessings. Hane shtayim shayche ahadade ve'en tushia teshu'a shlema min ha'oivim ela b'shtehen. So he says you need one with the other. In other words, a couple together. In other words, usually, right, we don't do that. We don't seal the blessing with two, concepts together in one shot. But here, since one depends on the other, in other words, our salvation again, right, depends on their downfall. So therefore, here we do couple them together into one blessing, even though it's two different things. That's what he's saying. Okay, good. אלא בשתיהן אחד שנפרד לנו באויבינו, ואחרת גדולה מזו שהושיענו מידם, ולא נפקד ממנו איש. Right, so not only that, he says, that he saved us and he performed their downfall at the same time, that's great, that's fantastic, but there's also another thing, which is that, by the Jews, right, nobody died here, right, in this battle. And that's a big thing, by the way, right? That not one Jew perished here. You can see what's going on today, right? We don't have such merit to have a victory like that, right? That one Jew didn't perish. We have many Jews that are perishing, unfortunately. We have already, with the victims, that died, and also the warriors. We have already, maybe 2,000 people that are dead. Something like that. I don't know, maybe less, right? Less than 2,000. More than 1,500 altogether, right? We have dead already. So, it's a lot of people. We have a lot of casualties. So here in the Purim story, there was no casualties by the Jews, which is incredible. By the way, when it comes to Hanukkah, also, even though we won that war, against the Greeks, but nevertheless, there was casualties there, So the Hanukkah victory, the miracle was not as great as the Purim miracle because of that. Because the Hanukkah miracle also had some casualties. That's what it says in the books. And also Maran, Rabbi, he told us that there was casualties there in that war. And this is one of the reasons he cites the Rabbi, that he says that because of that, we call it, there are no seudot, on Hanukkah. Why didn't they make seudot on Hanukkah, just like we have a seudah on Purim? Because there was casualties, so they didn't think it was that great of a victory, to make also seudah as well. So therefore, right, on Hanukkah, we don't have seudot. You don't have meals, really, I mean, you can make a meal if you want, but it's not an obligation, right? That's the thing. Right, you can make a nice party, whatever, right? Bring a band, bring music. You can do anything you want, but there's no obligation to have a seudah. But on Purim, there is an obligation to do at least one seudah, right, in the daytime. So that's because it was a greater victory than Hanukkah was. That's the thing. Okay, very good. So let's go on a little bit. The Ish lo amad b'fneim says, not only that, he says, right, but nobody was able to stand, before them. In other words, nobody was able to defend themselves. The enemies were not able to defend themselves when it comes to the Jews, right, who attacked them. Katav od sham Yerushalmi lo amru bracha le'acharei ela betzibur. So says the Yerushalmi, right? He brings that when we say that we make a blessing after the Megillah, we're talking about only when it's read in the community. But if you're reading it at home, we don't make that blessing afterwards, right? So that's halacha, by the way. We're going to see in the Shulchan Aruch, right, that we don't make the after blessing for the Megillah unless you read it with minyan. But if you read it by yourself at home, whatever, or whatever it may be, somewhere, right, at work, whatever you did, right. So then you don't make the after blessing, right? That's halacha. I remember, what do you call it? One year when I was in Israel, what do you call it? The prime minister, Rosh HaMemshala, Bibi, right? Whatever, right? So Bibi is not so religious, but he's religious enough to hear the Megillah. Can you imagine? He hears the Megillah, right? So he's not that secular, whatever, right? So what do you call it? So what does he do? He doesn't have time. He's too busy to go to shul. You know what I mean? So what he did was he had the chief rabbi, come over to his house and read it for him, in his house. So or in his office, whatever it was, right? Whatever it was. So that's what you do. So sometimes you're reading it in your office, in your work, whatever it is, right? Because you can't go to the minyan. So in a case like that, right, the after blessing is not made. Only the blessings which are said before. That's the way it is. Okay, good. So yeah, very nice. So that's the end of the. We have a little bit more here, right? We said here Katav Rab Amram, right? It says Rab Amram, one of the Geonim, right? Lo Aminan Ha'el Harav. וכן כתב מורדכי בשם בעל הלכות גדולות. He also says in מורדכי, דאחי נהוג במטיבתא, וכן כתוב באורחות חיים, right? So, what is this? We have to go back to the tour and see what he said there, because I don't remember what it was. So let's take a look at the tour. Yeah, so it says the Torah like this in the last line. It says, Katav Rab Amram, right? It says Rab Amram, Lo Aminan Ha'el Harab, Deha Aminan Eloheinu. So he says, Ubal Alachot Gadolot Katav, Mistabra Keman Shebracha Achrona, במנהג התליה מילתא אין לגעור במי שסח בקריאתה, דלאו הפסקה היא. So that's already something else. But he brings here Rab Amram. So he says, right, that we don't say this wording like this, Ha'el Harav, right? Instead of, he says we should say Eloheinu, right? Our God. Okay. So let's see what the Bet Yosef explains about that. That's the wording of the tour. So he brings also over here other sources that say that as well. So the proper text, the proper nusach is not Ha'el Harav, he says, but Eloheinu. Okay, so we'll see in the Shulchan Aruch, right, how he words that exactly. Let's take a look at the Shulchan Aruch. It seems like we have to go to the next chapter in the Shulchan Aruch. We gotta bring up the next chapter. So here we are. Taf Resh Tzadik Bet. Okay. Okay. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. So says Shulchan Aruch, הקורא את המגילה מברך לפניה ג' ברכות. When you read the Megillah, right, you got to do before three blessings, right? Which one? Al Mikra Megillah, right, on the reading of the Megillah, and then V'Sha'asta Nisim, that he made miracles. V'Shechianu, then we do Shechianu. These are the three blessings that we do before the Megillah. Uvayom eno chozer u'mbarech Shechianu, right? In the daytime, we don't go back and do Shechianu because we already did it at night. We don't do it twice, right? But says the Rama, right? Some say that you should also do Shechianu daytime, right? That's what the Ashkenazim do. So the Ashkenazim, as we said, right, do like that. So what they do is they make the Shechianu twice, once at night and once in the daytime. Right? So it says one can bless and the other one will read. So, it's not exclusive, right? These two things. You can have two different people doing it. Okay, interesting. So then he goes on, "Ulacharei noagim levarech hara bet ribenu," right? So then after we read the Megillah, the custom is to read this blessing, right? Hara bet ribenu, ve'im lo berech lo lefaneh ve'lo leacharei yatsa. So he says, right, that if he didn't make any of the blessings, whether before or after, he still fulfills the obligation. So what do you see from there, right? There's a general rule, when it comes to mitzvot, that if you didn't do the bracha and you did the mitzvah, you fulfilled your obligation, right, of the mitzvah. That's the general rule. So here also that applies as well, So if you didn't make any of the blessings, but you read the Megillah, you fulfilled your obligation even without the blessings, right? So the blessings don't hold back the mitzvah. They just it's just something that the rabbis decree to do, to bless. But the Torah really doesn't require you to bless on mitzvot, So what happens is that the rabbis added this. And therefore, right, the rule is that if you forgot to do it, you still did the mitzvah, right, as is, no problem. I mean, you don't have to go back and do the mitzvah again, whatever, right? In fact, that would be wasteful to do such a thing like that. So, that's good to know. So says Rama here, ונהגו לומר בלילה אשר הני, אבל לא ביום. So says the Rama, right, at night they have this custom where Ashkenazim, they say this Heini, right? It's a language, that they use the Ashkenazim, but not in the daytime. He says, Ve'en levarech achareya ela betzibur. So as we said, right, that you should only bless the after blessing if you're in the community, right? So if you're not in the community and you're doing it by yourself, you don't do the after blessing, right? So that's the custom. So you see from there, by the way, that what do you call it? That this is like the after blessing is like a custom, So we don't do it in every scenario. Some places we do it, some places we don't do it, right? Depending on where you are and how you're reading, so forth and so on. Okay, good. So that's the story with the Shulchan Aruch. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go on. So let's go to Bet. So says the tour over here, right? He brings the tour. So he says, right, that since the this, as we said, right, the final blessing, right, the after blessing is only a custom, right? It's customary in some places, whatever. That's what's in B'Shem Bala Dibrot. Then Lashon Rabbeinu medukdak. So he says here the language of the tour is not precise. So he says Rabbeinu should have written like this, the tour. Right? Bal Haitur, Katab Bal Haitur, says the Bal Haitur, Kivan Shebracha Achrona, Teha lo ata Bal Haitur leafluge al shum dadam. So he says, you know why? Because the Bal Haitur here is not coming to argue with anybody. He's just giving you a detail here, which is, you need to know. But in terms of the halacha, nobody argues here. There's no machloket here. So I'll go back to the tour and see, right, exactly what he says there. So he says like this, right? Ubala, it says like this, Ubala Itur, Kata, Mistabra, Keman Shebracha, Achrona, Minhag Atalia Milta. He says, since the final blessing is a custom, En Nigor B'mishesh Sach B'kriyata, Delav Hafsaka Hi, Ela B'kriyat Talia Milta. So he says, you know what? If somebody's talking during the final blessing, he says, you don't have to rebuke him. Why? Since it's only a custom, we're not so particular about it. That's what he says. Interesting, right? So, but he says it's not correct, though. He says this opinion. The Torah doesn't agree. Why is that? So he says, since we are, right, making the blessing, you shouldn't make an interruption there, by talking. So he says, what difference does it make if it's only a custom? In other words, once you already made it a custom to bless, so you should do it the right way. What does that mean, the right way? Don't make an interruption, So he says in the end, he's got to bless, he's blessing. Okay, so that's what he says here. And regarding this, says the Bet Yosef, that Shibbolei Leket also writes this, right? But he says also, right, that the Balai Tur is not really coming to argue with anybody. Right, so basically what's going on is that the Balai Tur himself is saying this custom is not correct. Okay, good. So and then he goes on. And not ta'ana, so he says this is not really a claim, he says, right? That the Tur, right, argues with the Balai Tur. So again, right, to review this whole thing, right? To recap the whole thing. What's going on? So the Balai Tur says that you don't have to be worried about making an interruption. Why? It's only a custom. Comes the Tur and says, oh, wait a second, but it's still your blessing, so you should be careful about that, not to interrupt, right, with some kind of a speech and this and that. So okay, so right, comes the Bet Yosef and says that this refutation of the Tur is not correct, he says. So he says, since he's not obligated to bless here, and this blessing is not really, right, going on the Megillah itself, but rather, as we said, right, it's more like, we're blessing, and we're blessing Hashem for giving us the miracle. That's what it really is, right? It's not really connected to the Megillah so much. Alanes, like the Ran says, right? The Yilkach says, therefore, ena inyan Megillah. So he says, really, it's not really connected to the Megillah. This blessing, right? It's more on the miracle. So therefore, right, you can't really say, oh, don't make an interruption, because what interruption are you talking about? You're telling me not to interrupt, but this, blessing and the Megillah are not connected, so that's not really called an interruption. That's what he's saying. Right? So he says that's if he is reading himself, right? The person was the reader himself. Aval hashomea mitam, right? But he says the one who hears it mitam acher en lo leafsik, he shouldn't interrupt, right? The person who's hearing it. Because you know why? If he's going to start talking, he's not going to hear what the reader is saying. He didn't hear the whole thing. Therefore, he didn't fulfill his obligation. So he's telling you, right, that which we said, that you can make an interruption, that's talking about the reader. But the ones who are listening, they should not do so because they're going to miss the blessing, right, which is being recited by the reader and not hear it properly. Okay. That's what we're saying over here, right? Interesting point. I bet Yosef is saying, right? So he's pushing out the opinion of the Tur, right? Who argues with the Balai Tur. Right? There's the Balai Tur, there's the Tur, two different guys, right? Don't get them mixed up. Okay, so right, two different people. So good. Let's go on. So he says, "V'zeh lashon Rashba," right? What about the Rashba? What does he say? "Sha'alta shaliach tzibur sheberach al mikra megillah v'karag biktzata." Right? Oh my God. So, right, well, I hope this doesn't happen to us, right? This the story here. So he says that what happened? The Shliach Tzibur made a blessing, right? And on the Megillah, and then he started to read it, right? So he read part of it, and then all of a sudden, right, a fight broke out, right, in outside, right, outdoors, outside the shul. So they heard, right, people are listening to that, right? There, there's fighting going on. Right, so they're screaming, yelling, this, that, whatever. Right, so some of them went out, right, to see what's going on, right, to observe, to the action, right, to see the action over there, what's going on, right, and then they came back in, right. So I guess the question is, if they went out, to hear, to try to see the fight, right, to see, then they came back in. Did they fulfill their obligation, or because they missed some of the reading, right? They did not. I guess that's the question that he's being asked here, right? We already talked about this a little bit before, right? I mentioned it, but here is the source, right? The Rashba. Tshuva afilu shahak kadeli gmoro, right? Kula eno chozer lerosh. So he says, even if they had to stop, right, in order to finish the whole thing, enough time to finish the whole thing, as we said, right? How long does it take to read the Megillah? About a half hour, let's say, right, on the average. It's about a half hour reading. So even if they waited that long, right, and they stopped, then they came back in, right, and they started reading again. So he says, Kula eno chozer lerosh. He doesn't have to go back. So in other words, they did fulfill their obligation, even though they stopped in the middle. So what's the story, right? What happened here? Right, there, as we said, there was a fight that broke out outside, right? So they all stopped, everybody stopped, right? They all wanted to see what's going on. So they all went outside to see what's going on. And then they came back in and started reading again, right? So the question is, right, do they have to start from beginning, or they can start from a place where they stopped, right? So the answer is that they don't have to start from beginning, right? Even though they waited a half hour, until they started up again. That's what he says. The Rashba. Okay. So he says, "Ve'im chazru v'karu asu shelo kehogim." So even if they would do that, right, to start from beginning, he says that would be improper to do so, even if you want to be machmir, right? Why is that? Because if they're going to bless again, right, it's going to be a blessing in vain because they already started before. So therefore, the proper thing to do is not to read it from beginning, right? What should they do? Continue from where they left off. That's what they should do. Right? Don't be a hero. You know what I mean? Just do what it says in halakha. That's it. Right? Don't try to be machmir. It's not a good idea here to be machmir. So it says not only that, but even if they spoke, they had some conversations there. They all started to get into it. It's still, they can continue from where they left off. So it's not considered to be an interruption, even though they spoke about other things, right? So he says, because the interruption would only be a problem if they spoke between the blessing and the reading, right? In other words, the beginning, right, of the reading. That would be a problem. But since they already started to read a part of it, right, and then they stopped in the middle, so there, right, the fact that they spoke is not going to be interruption. אבל התחלת המעשה או המצווה, but after they start doing it already, right, the reading or the mitzvah, whatever it is, שבירך עליה, they blessed on it, אינו הפסק, it's not considered interruption. אינו חוזר ומברך, right? So he doesn't have to go back and bless again. אלא שכיוצא בזה ראוי שלא להשיח עד גמר המצווה. So he says, but the proper thing to do is not to speak, you know what I mean? In other words, lechatchila, you shouldn't speak. But if they did, you know, they don't have to go back to the beginning. So he says the person who does speak, you know, we rebuke him about that. In other words, he shouldn't be talking, right? Lebo lemitzvah, אבל אם sach, right? Why is that? Why do we rebuke him? So he says the reason is because, you know, he should be paying attention to the mitzvah, right, and not talking about other things. אבל אם sach אינו חוזר. So he says, but if he, right, he did speak though, you know, but diavad, he doesn't have to go back to the beginning. שהרי פוסק באמצע ההלל מפני הכבוד, because you see, right, even in the middle of the Hallel, we can make an interruption to give somebody greetings, right, for honor. ששואל ומשיב, hi, כדיני, right, you could even, right, whether you're answering or just, you know, saying hello, hi, כדיני, v'hai kedina, right? Each one is going towards the halacha. Ve'eno chozer u'barech, so you don't have to bless again, right? Even for Hallel. So the same thing here as well, right? You don't have to bless again. So, right, that's what the Rashba answers regarding these two issues, right? It's very important to know that. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch here with a bet. Right, so says the Shulchan Aruch, right? Very short, very concise. It says, "En lasuach be'od shekorin ota," right? Lechatchila, you shouldn't speak when they're reading the Megillah, right? Obviously, right? But as we said, right, bet diavad, if they did speak, so they don't have to go back to the beginning. Unless, right, there would be a problem, by the way, in one case, which is that if, you know, let's say the reader continued to read and the people who are listening start to speak, you know, and they missed some of the reading, you know, so there they have a problem. They have to go back to the beginning because, you know, they didn't hear a part of the Megillah. So that's going to be already a problem, you know. But here we're not talking about that. We're talking about where everybody stopped, you know, and so this way they don't have to go back. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go on. I think we have one more here. Gimel. Two more. Okay. So he says here, right, he brings the tour. Misha קורא לחולה, אף על פי שהוא קרא כבר, יברך להוציא, מי שקורא לו, לקיים עליהם כל הברכות, אף על פי שיצא מוציא, right? So this is also an important rule, right? Which is that, let's say, a person already read the Megillah one time, right? And now he's reading for somebody else, right? Who wasn't there, right? Whatever, let's say he's sick, whatever, right? So he has to bless again, even though he already fulfills obligation himself. But now he's blessing for the one who's listening to him, right? So he also has to bless for him as well. You know, so therefore he's got to bless again. So he says, right, there's a general rule when it comes to this, that when it comes to blessings, right, even though you already fulfilled your obligation, you can still fulfill the obligation of others as well. So here, that's what we're talking about, right? You already did your job, but now, right, you're trying to help the others who weren't able to be there, right? So you have to bless for them as well, even though you already fulfilled your obligation, right? So it says, right, to Bet Yosef, what is the source for this? Right, the Sopek Ra'au Beddin, right, over there in the Gemara, Rosh Hashanah, right, Kaftet Amud Aleph, Tanei Ahava Bere de Rabbi Zera, Kol HaBrachot Kulan, Af Al Pi She'yatza Motzi. So he says, right, the same thing that we just said. Every blessing, right, even though you already fulfilled your obligation, you can still fulfill the obligation of others. Chutz mi Birkat HaLechem, except bread. the blessing for the bread, right, which is hamotzi. V'yayin, right, also for wine. But two Tanya, right? Why can't you do it with those? By the way, what's the reason why? Because you have to eat it, otherwise, right? You can't bless on those things. So the only way you could bless is if you eat. So this is the reason why you can't do it. There is a solution for that too, by the way. There are solutions for that. That you could sometimes, what we say is you bless and somebody else eats it. That sometimes can work as well. So anyway, right? He says here. The Tanya hatam behalel u'megillah afal pi she'yatza motzi. And we also said regarding the Halel Megillah, right, that even though he fulfills obligation already, he can still fulfill the obligation of others. So what does that mean? He can be blessed for them as well, even though he blessed for himself already beforehand. Okay, good. So that's that's Gimel, right? So we'll see the Shulchan Aruch here. So it says Shulchan Aruch, as we said, right? Even though he fulfills the obligation, he can still fulfill the obligation of others, and bless for them. That's the idea, So that reminds me, by the way, that there's discussion about this when it comes to Havdalah, like let's say you already made Havdalah, So the question is, can you make now for your wife, and for your family? And the answer is yes. It's the same thing, right? And so, you're going to have to drink again, right? The wine, or somebody else will have to drink, right? Your wife or your children, somebody's got to drink there, right? When you make the Havdalah. So if you don't want to drink, right, somebody else can drink, but you can make the Havdalah for them, right? Even though you already fulfilled your obligation, let's say in the shul, right? They already made the Havdalah. So you did the Havdalah in the shul. So then you go home, right? You can do it for your family as well. But the truth is, the better way to do it is to wait till you go home, right? And fulfill your obligation together with the family. Why should you do it in the shul, right? What's unless you're in a hurry for some reason to make Havdalah, you have to go somewhere, whatever it is. Okay, that I understand. But right, otherwise, the best thing to do, is just to go home and do it everybody together. But if you have no choice, right? Whatever, there's a need for that. So you can do it that way as well. You can fulfill the obligation of your wife or your family, right? Even though, right, even though you already did it beforehand. Okay, so these are all the same concepts. They're all the same. Okay, good. So we have one more, right? Dalid. Let's see what it says there. The same thing would apply, by the way, to shofar as well, right? Let's say, you already did the shofar in the morning, and then, right, some men came, who didn't hear the shofar. So you got to bless for them too, even though you already did your blessing. But if they're coming just women, you shouldn't bless because the women, are not obligated. So for the women, we don't bless, when it comes to the shofar, right? I'm not talking about the Megillah because the women are obligated for the blessing, in the Megillah. But when it comes to shofar, they're not obligated. So therefore, for the women, we don't bless. But if some men came, right, and they weren't able to hear in the morning, and now you got to fulfill their obligation, the shofar, you do bless for them because same as what we just said now, same idea.
I have a question, Rabbi,
Yes.
please. For example, if you are the Rabbi of a shul, but there comes men on different occasions, you can do it for every one of them, or there is a limitation of the number of occasions you can recite the blessing again?
Wait, you're talking about locations?
No, sorry. If you are the Rav of a shul,
yes,
and there comes many people on different occasions during the day.
What does that mean?
They want to different times,
for different times. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. That you did already in the morning, and now they came in the afternoon, right?
But is there a limitation? Like I
Oh, you
can
could do
only
it
do.
1,000 times. You could do it 1,000 times.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I'm showing.
if you
Great,
need it, I
that's
mean,
it.
better to put everybody together if you can. But if you can't, let's say for some reason, you could do it 1,000 times. If they keep coming. So for each one, you can do it again.
Okay, great, thank you.
I'm sure you have better things to do, but so I mean, we're talking about in theory, because in practice, I mean, usually this doesn't happen. You know what I mean? Usually they're coming like, twice, let's say, whatever, right? Once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and that's it, that's about it, right? So yeah, usually it's like twice.
But there's an
But
obligation to hear the whole Megillah, so we're not talking about people who came in after you started, though.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
The obligation is to hear the whole Megillah, so that we're not, like, if you started to read and then someone came in late, you don't start over again. You mean they have to wait. They have to
Sure.
wait until
Well,
read.
if they
until
came in late, obviously, you can't stop and do it again. I mean, this would be like you're favoring an individual over the community, which is not proper to do. You know what I mean? So in a case like that, they would have to go to a different reading. Maybe you could read for them again, right? As we said, in the afternoon, you know what I mean? Different time. But this reading is already started. What are you going to do now? Stop in the middle and do it again, right? You can't do that. It's not proper to do that. Why? What's the reason why it's not proper? We call that tircha de tzibura, right? What does that mean? That you're making the community suffer, right? By having to wait. You know what I mean? That's not right to do that. For one person, you're going to make people wait half hour. You know what I mean? That's not right. The community comes first, right? I remember, when I was in one of the shuls over here in the neighborhood, they would try to pull off this, stunt, like some people, somebody had to say Kaddish, you know what I mean? Let's say, a mourner or something, right? So he calls up, the shul and he says, oh, I'll be late, so wait for me, because, I want to do the Kaddish, So I used to tell them, we don't wait for nobody. I'm sorry, but we start, like the community is expecting you to start at 4:30, you know what I mean? So we can't wait, for us one individual, and make everybody suffer. I mean, you can't do that. So, all the more so over here, right? Which is going to be a big hassle for everybody. Okay, so let's go on in the bit Yosef, right? He brings a Tosefta here. I'm not sure if we read this. I'll read it. So he says, right, that קרא בן עומד, בן יושב, בן שברך לפניה ולאחריה, תוספתא, right? כתבתי לוקח. So he says, right, that the Tosefta says like this, that whether you read it standing or sitting, right, or as we said, right, you made the blessings or not, you fulfilled your obligation. So the truth is, lechatchila, we say, right, that the chazan should be standing when he reads. Community, if I'm not mistaken, right? That's what we said. The community should be standing. At home, if you're reading at home, you could be sitting, That's not a problem. But if you're reading the community, the chazan should be standing, the Baal Koreh, right? But let's say he made a mistake, right? And he read it sitting, You fulfilled your obligation. It just, that's not so crucial, this whole thing, right? It just, it's more like, kavod, it's, honor, like proper respect, reverence, right? By standing. Respect for who? Respect for the community, right? That's what it is, right? It's not respect for God because, what do you call it? When it comes to sitting, reading by yourself, you could read sitting. So it's respect for the community. That's what it is. Right? That's why we stand. But the people who are listening don't stand, right? They sit, we're talking about only the chazan, the Baal Koreh, right? The people who are listening, they sit. That's the way it goes, right? Okay, good. So we have one more here. We have Dalid, right? So it says here, כתב בתרומת הדשן, right? It says in תרומת הדשן, מי שהוא אנוס קצת שלא יכול ללכת לבית הכנסת לקראת המגילה. Let's say, right, as we said, right, he can't go to the shul, right, for some reason, right? Let's say he's a prime minister, you know what I mean? So prime ministers tend to be a little bit busy, you know what I mean? They have a job to do, you know what I mean? So he can't go to shul. So he brings the chief rabbi, right, as we said, right, to come to his office and read over there for him. This is what happens, right? So, what do you call it? וצריך להמתין עד שיאכל בית הכנסת את קריאת המגילה, וצריך להמתין עד לאחר שקראו הקהל, וקשה עליו לשב כל כך בתענית, יכול לשמוע קריאתם בעוד יום, לאחר תפילת הערבית, מפלג המנחה ואילך, דהיינו שעה ורביע הקודם להיללס. Right, so he says something interesting here, right, which is important to know. It applies, by the way, to also other mitzvot as well. Not only this mitzvah, but so he says, right, let's say he can't, a person has a hard time, as we said, right, to come to the reading. So what he needs he needs a tailor-made program, for himself, right? So what's a tailor-made program? He needs to read it before it gets dark, before dusk, before even sunset. So the question is, can you read the Megillah before sunset at night, right? It's not even night yet, it's still daytime, right? Can you fulfill your obligation like that, or is it too early, right? So he says that if there's a special need for this person, to do it that way, you can do it. So what does that mean from Plaga Mincha, right? Plaga Mincha is like an hour before sunset. So that's already considered to be night, according to Rabbi Yehuda, right, in the Talmud, in Masechet Brachot. So therefore, right, since there's an opinion like that, you can rely on that. And light, right, so not light, but to read the Megillah before sunset, 1 hour, up to 1 hour before sunset. You can do that. And by the way, the same applies also for Hanukkah candles, same thing over there. Also for Shabbat candles, right? Shabbat candles also you can do early if you want, like 1 hour before sunset, if there's a need for that. Even though you have to take on Shabbat sometimes because of that, you got to take on Shabbat. Whatever it is, that's a different issue, right? I'm not going to get into that now. We're not talking about Shabbat. But the point is, right, that in general, right, when there's a need to do, right, early, right, a mitzvah earlier, a little bit earlier, 1 hour before sunset. Also, by the way, same thing applies to Arvit, right? When you pray Arvit, the night prayer, if there's a need, to pray earlier because of some issue, right, whatever it is, you can pray also like up to 1 hour before, right? And then when it gets dark, right, you can do Kriyat Shema again, right, one more time, read it over, to make sure you fulfill your obligation. But the truth is that the Rosh says you fulfill your obligation even before. So whatever it is, right? But anyway, the point is, right, same thing also applies here. So good, we're done with that. We're done with Yosef, we're done with the tour. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch and we're done with the whole chapter. Okay, let's see what's going on. Good. So says Shulchan Aruch, right? מי שהוא אנוס קצת ואינו יכול ללכת בית כנסת, וצריך להמתין לאחר שקראו הקהל, קשה עליו לשבת בתענית כל כך. So he says, this guy, he can't go to shul, right? He's got a problem, and he can't wait until they finish, the reading in the shul. Why? Because, they're fasting, so he's got to read the Megillah. So therefore, he says, what he can do is, Yachol Lishma Kriyata Mibed Yom. As we said, right, from Plaga Mincha, he can read the Megillah or hear the reading, Ulmala, right? So what is that? As we said, it's 1 hour before sunset, right? Okay, so, by the way, there is a machloket between the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. That, as we said, right, that according to the Sephardi custom, it's 1 hour before sunset, right? But according to the Ashkenazi custom, it's what do you call it? 1 hour and 15 minutes. It's a little bit longer, right? So a bit different, right? Anyway, so says Rama here, אבל אסור לאכול קודם שישמע קריאת מגילה. But it says, either way, right, you're not allowed to eat before you hear the Megillah. In other words, what does that mean? You can have a snack if you want, right, by the way, right? You can have a chocolate bar or something, We're not talking about that. Or you can have some fruit, right, whatever, some fruits, some vegetables, whatever, a snack, right? That you can have, but you can't have a meal before you do the Megillah. Afilu atanit kashe alav, even though it's hard for you, right? So this is the reason why this guy needs to read it a little bit earlier, because if he has to wait until they finish, right, he's going to be waiting another hour, and that's going to be hard for him to wait that long. So therefore, the rule is, right, in a case like that, we allow him to read, as we said, Plaga Mincha, which is 1 hour before sunset. Okay, according to Sephardi custom, right, as we said. According to Ashkenazi custom, like there's a 15 minutes difference there, right? It's about between the Ashkenazi and Sephardi custom. Okay, so good. Yeah. So that's about it, right? We're done with the chapter. We're finished. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, be blessed with wealth, health, and happiness. We'll see you tomorrow. B'ezrat Hashem. Chazak u'baruch. Laila tov. Pray for our amazing army to be victorious over Amalek. B'ezrat Hashem. Here we're reading it. Here we're studying about Amalek. Over there, they're actually performing it, right? The mitzvah. So we all have our portion, you know, right? We're doing the spiritual part, they're doing the physical part. Okay, God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem. Chazak u'baruch.
Kabbalah Taraf.
Right,